it came to my attention that fashion and clothing was the fastest growing part of our waste stream. We're dealing with this tremendous issue around waste in our country and the cost to municipalities. I came from local government. I know how much it costs to deal with the landfill. And then understanding the amount of toxics that are leaking into our groundwater, that are in our oceans, that are in our bodies. And where does all that come from?
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now, the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Good Dirt Podcast, another Friday. And this is Fashion Revolution Week. Fashion Revolution Week is an annual campaign hosted by the organization Fashion Revolution at fashionrevolution.org, bringing together the world's largest fashion activism movements for a week of action. Fashion Revolution Week happens every year in the week coinciding with April 24th, the anniversary of the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh. If you'll remember, the Rana Plaza building housed a number of garment factories employing around 5,000 people. The people in this building were manufacturing clothing for many of the biggest global fashion brands, many of which you would recognize. So the building collapsed and killed 1,134 people and injured more than 2,500 others, making it the fourth largest industrial disaster in history. The victims were mostly young women. Now, those of you that have been with us from the beginning will know that Lady Farmer began in 2016 as a slow fashion brand. Yes, we designed and manufactured the Essential Collection, which was 5 core wardrobe pieces that were created with the most natural and sustainable materials available and made right here in the Washington, D.C. area by a small woman-owned company. We funded the production with a successful Kickstarter campaign, and in the process created a flourishing community of those drawn to our mission of creating space for an earth-friendly lifestyle that is compatible to living more slowly and sustainably on the planet. Since that time, the movement to create more sustainable clothing has grown quite a bit, and since then, Lady Farmer has become much more than a slow fashion brand. We've held retreats and workshops and continued to build our online community, which you can now find on Substack. And of course, we've hosted the Good Dirt podcast now continually for the past 5 years. So as a nod to our beginnings, we recognize Fashion Revolution Week as an important opportunity to continue raising awareness of the enormous global issues that the fast fashion industry has presented to the world and our economy. And so today, our honored guest for this episode is Chellie Pingree, a U.S. representative for Maine's 1st Congressional District, where she's been serving since 2009. And she's also a huge advocate for slow fashion. In fact, it was last June where we met Shelly at the kickoff of the first ever Congressional Slow Fashion Caucus, which Shelly launched to create climate-smart policies to reduce, repair, rewear, and recycle textiles. Shelly lives on the offshore island of North Haven, Maine, where she raised her kids and ran a small business, served on the school board, and as the local tax assessor, never anticipating a life in politics. But in 1991, she won the race for the state Senate, and in 2008 was elected to Congress from Maine's 1st Congressional District, the first woman elected to Congress from that district. She sits on several committees, among them the House Agricultural Committee, and has become an advocate for Congress for sustainable, organic, and locally focused farming, as well as to reduce food waste. We were really excited to be there at the launch on Capitol Hill in DC to meet Shelly and to hear her announce that the launch of the Slow Fashion Caucus marks a new era in the fight against climate change. The Congresswoman will bring her expertise to the first ever DC Climate Week on April 28th. That's next week, where she'll join a panel to highlight innovations in fiber farming and textile production that can address supply chain issues and benefit the environment. Also speaking at this event are representatives of the big brand Calvin Klein, speakers from local projects such as the Pennsylvania Flax Project, and the International Organization of Cotton Producing, Importing, and Exporting Countries. If you're in the area and interested, you can sign up to attend People-Centered Climate Solutions, the Case of Cotton and Textiles, at dcclimateweek.com. That's dcclimateweek.com. We've seen such a surge in activism and awareness surrounding slow fashion since we first entered this space with Lady Farmer in 2016. And we're so grateful to Chellie Pingree for bringing this discussion to the level of the U.S. Congress. And we're also very grateful that she took the time to join us on The Good Dirt and share her good works and experience with us. As you'll learn in this conversation, she's a true lady farmer herself. So here's Congresswoman Chellie Pingree, U.S. Representative for Maine's 1st Congressional District.
Well, my name is Chellie Pingree. I represent the 1st Congressional District of Maine, which is one of only 2 congressional districts of Maine. My home is on the island of North Haven, an island of 450 people, 12 miles off the coast of Maine. Takes an hour to get here on a ferry. But every week, I pack up and I go to Washington, D.C., and I've been doing that now for 16 years. So I've spent a little bit of time in Congress. I'm like a lot of people who end up in politics. This was never my plan. I certainly never thought about it growing up. I actually was born in Minnesota. Yeah, sure, you betcha. So I'm from there originally. Grandparents were all Scandinavian immigrants who came there to be farmers. But that was the furthest thing from my mind when I was a kid growing up. Was kind of more like an anti-war protester, rebellious hippie, ended up being a back to the lander. And as part of that journey, I came to the state of Maine following a boy. And we had both read Helen and Scott Nearing's book, Living the Good Life. And that was an important Bible. This was 1971 when I ended up on this particular island. And I've been here for the rest of my life. That book, there were a lot of people doing that at the time. Maine actually had an immigration in the 70s of people who had this idea we could live sustainably on the earth. It was about the same time as the first Earth Day, and we wanted to grow our own food and make our own clothes and, live a much simpler life and sort of escape from what we considered was going wrong in the country at the time. There were a lot of great books we referred to because many of us, even though my grandparents were farmers, hadn't paid any attention growing up. So we, read Foxfire and the Whole Earth Journal and Mother Earth News, and there were all kinds of things that we would turn to. But we also learned a lot from our friends and neighbors. There were still older farmers in my community, and I had the opportunity to learn a lot from them. Eventually, I needed to know more about farming than I was learning from books. So I became a student at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. It was a brand new college at the time, and had one degree in human ecology, but also had the great value of having Elliot Coleman, who's one of the great organic farmers of this era, and he was my teacher. So I learned a tremendous amount about organic farming. And in those days, that was like a hippie back to the lander thing. There wasn't really a lot of knowledge about it, and people didn't really take it that seriously. But I learned a lot. And after going to college, came back to the island, had my own small farm with 3 dairy cows and 100 chickens and a couple of acres of vegetables. So that was my start in the 70s.
Wow.
Sold raw milk, had a friend who baked homemade baked goods, and started turning the wool from my sheep into yarn, and eventually started my own knitting business of hand knitters. Then we had a knitting kit company, wrote 5 knitting pattern books. As you can see, along the way, I've had 3 kids. I've been a farmer. Never expected during any of those things that politics was somehow in my life. But I will say that when you live in a small town, and like I said, there's just about 450 people here, Every year, our business all gets decided like it will this Saturday at our annual town meeting. And I love the town meeting. Everybody gets into the room, you make every decision for the town. Every line item is considered about how much you'll spend on fixing the roads and paying for medical care and everything else. And it was such a participatory thing that really made me start being interested in how we govern ourselves, just from a personal kind of way. I decided I would run for public office in my little tiny town. And since I wasn't born here and outsiders weren't always treated with, there was a little bit of suspicion if you're from away, even though I'd lived here for a while. I ran for the tax assessor because it was a job nobody else wanted. And I thought I could win, and I did. So I started as a tax assessor, then I was a planning board member, and almost 20 years into living in the community, I became the chair of my local school board. And that really was an important time for me because I had 3 kids and dealing with education. And I just loved the way that people with differing views, there were 5 of us, would come together, and make challenging decisions about how to spend the taxpayers' money or what the curriculum should be for our kids. And totally randomly around that time, I took my 11-year-old daughter, and another friend took her 11-year-old daughter to Portland, Maine, which is a few hours away, and listened to a woman in Congress at the time named Pat Schroeder give a talk. And when Pat Schroeder was speaking, this was the early 90s, said, good people don't want to run for office anymore. They just want to make money and go into business, and we need more good people. And it really got me thinking, like, why don't people do that? I just hadn't crossed my mind. And I walked out of the room, and somebody I knew, because they'd been to my vegetable stand, said, hey, we can't find a candidate for the state legislature in your district. You should run. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding. I've got 3 kids and a small business. Like, I'm never going to do that. I live on an island. It was one of those moments where I turned to my daughter, who was 11 or 12, and she said, Mom, you should go for it. And I
Oh,
drove home. I got back on the ferry, and about a week later, somebody called me up and said, would you come to this meeting of the League of Women Voters? We're looking, we heard you might be interested. Anyway, that's how these stories go. And before you know it, I was like, wow, this would be so amazing to get to work on policy, healthcare and all these things. And I ended up running in 1992 for the state legislature, and I beat a conservative incumbent in my district, which at the time was 40% Republican and 40% independent, only
wow.
20% Democrat. And I think I won because I was a small business owner, because a tremendous number of people had read my knitting books, and I would go knock on doors. You have
I
to
love
knock on
this.
doors, canvas people, and they would say, "You're the knitter." So it was just one of those things, and living on an island, which should have been a geographical disadvantage, I think was an advantage to me, because people were like, that's a different kind of life. It means you're really committed and you're committed to your community. And I had a farm stand, and
Yeah.
it just presented a very different point of view. So that's a very long
Oh,
explanation,
I
but
love it. It's
that kind of
great.
takes me to many years, and I've had the great privilege now of being a state legislator. I worked for a few years in between. I worked for a good government kind of organization, and I've been in Congress in 16 years. And even more exciting, my daughter Hannah ended up following me into the state legislature, and she was the youngest female Speaker of the House ever. So that
Wow.
young woman who said that to me went into politics herself. But anyway, I still live on the same island. I still care about many of the same things. I've had a couple of different farms along the way, and really had the experience of being a small farmer. And anyway, you got it. That's it.
Oh, how
Wow, and then you're gonna run for president, right?
No, no, no. Very happy with what I do in a very challenging time.
Well, this is so inspiring, and I hope it speaks to a lot of our listeners that might be just like you. Like, I can't do that. I didn't go to law
Right.
school, or I don't have the background in this, or I'm not that kind of person that would get all involved in politics. Politics are about our daily lives. I just really appreciate the way you represent the granularity of everyday life, and small town, small business, mom working in the dirt, farmer, gardener, knitter, all these great things. So thank you for your story. I think it's incredibly inspiring to our listeners.
And just to reinforce, I meet with kids and people all the time, groups of women, and just say exactly what you said. You're not trained to go into
Mm,
politics. You live your life,
yeah.
and the more people can bring those lives and the understanding into the work we do, the better off we will be. You certainly don't have to be a lawyer. In fact, We make those laws. Lawyers just interpret them. You get to be on the front lines with that.
Wow.
Yes, and I think we're all coming to appreciate that on a daily basis these days, how
Mhm.
important just the laws are. And,
Exactly.
we're all thinking about that a lot right now.
So we got to be there for the launch day of the Slow Fashion Caucus, which was so exciting. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and what happened between you being sympathetic to all these issues and saying, oh, slow fashion, fast fashion is a problem? How did it go from that to a congressional caucus? And what does that look like and what do they do?
Sure. I think it brought a lot of things together for me in a whole variety of ways. I mean, number one, I come from Maine, and that's a great thing because people don't think about what high fashion outfit they're going to wear to go out to dinner.
Right.
Like I often joke with people, you can go to the nicest restaurant in Portland, Maine, and the fanciest lawyer will be in there in a flannel shirt and LL Bean boots, and nobody expects you to wear anything else. So that's just an important part of my state. Fashion didn't fit into our sort of way of life. And also people love to reuse, rewear, thrift, make their own clothes. Lots of knitters here, lots of people who, pride themselves on what they make. I was in the knitting business, raised sheep. So I'm a big believer in natural textiles, would rather wear something made out of flax or linen or, cotton or hemp or anything myself. It's just better for you, better for a lot of reasons. And because I'm a farmer, I want to see, American products and American farmers make the things that go into our clothing. Fast forward, I guess, into my congressional job. So I'm on the agriculture committee. We've been doing a lot of work on, hemp farming and how do we get more of those products made in the United States. I'm also what's called the ranking member of the subcommittee on interior and environment and appropriations. So we're the ones who fund the EPA. And under that, over the years, I've learned a lot about our failed recycling system. So while getting to know recycling better, worrying about plastics in the ocean, so many challenges that are going on right now or have been over the last few years, it came to my attention that fashion and clothing was the fastest growing part of our waste stream. We're dealing with this tremendous issue around waste in our country and the cost of municipalities. I came from local government. I know how much it costs to deal with the landfill. And then understanding the amount of toxics that are leaking into our groundwater, that are in our oceans, that are in our body. And where does all that come from? And to come to find out, I never liked clothing made out of synthetics anyway, but then now about maybe 70% of our clothing comes from some kind of a fossil fuel. You learn more about it, and then before you know it, you're hearing about this fast fashion throwaway world. And I always knew it was kind of yucky, but I didn't realize how enormous it was. And everybody who's, on the internet sees the ads come through that show you a garment that, doesn't look so bad and it's only $6. And all of a sudden you realize like it'll come overnight because it's shipped overnight from China under a loophole called the de minimis loophole that makes it possible for them to outcompete our domestic manufacturers. So you just start putting all this stuff together about bad trade policy and toxics in our environment and landfills that are being paid for by municipalities, or the amount of waste that we are shipping to countries all over the world and making them deal with it. Anyway, it just all sort of came together, and I, started researching the laws because I'm on that committee and realized that we didn't even have a lot of good facts and figures. And one of the things that was available to me, particularly under the last EPA that just ended with the new administration, but I could go to Michael Regan, who testified before my committee, the head of the EPA, and say, what are you guys doing about this? Are you aware of it? Have you done studies? Can we get more information? So that led us to both start the caucus to see if more of my colleagues wanted to be involved in this issue. Many of them know more about the fashion world or know something about different pieces of it. And it also led us to ask for a study around it, which we just received. But we got many signups on our subcommittee. We're waiting to put together a piece of legislation. And usually once you do that, you'll get even more people. But I was thrilled to know when I started circulating a letter to my colleagues, that many of them were already very much aware of thrifting, or they had kids in school who were already actively engaged in and posting about this all the time, or there was a real interest in their district, or they had a business in their district that was trying to work on recycling fashion or making sustainable fashion. And so it continues to spread. we're all a little distracted by some of the challenges that we're dealing with right now, but it continues to fit into the mix. And even in this era, we're thinking about constantly changing trade policy and the tariffs that we're dealing with, and how do we make sure that we get the de minimis loophole removed, or in other EPA policy. And I'll be working on funding for the EPA, that it doesn't get lost, that we have to deal with the waste stream that's going there. So I won't say it's an easy time, but I will say, public interest in this continues to grow, because people are just really outraged by how much of our clothing is being thrown away and how much of these toxics end up in our environment and in our bodies.
Do you think that the new tariffs, and no one knows at this point where all that's going to land, will have the effect of actually making people more aware of this because clothing might become way more expensive? What do you think?
I mean, you always hope that if there's a good outcome from tariffs, and that's a part of the stated goal, is to support more domestic manufacturing,
Yeah.
to support more domestic use of products. This particular issue on the de minimis loophole, which allows particularly companies like Temu and Shein
Mm.
to import into our country individual products one at a time, as long as their value is under $800. In President Trump's original tariff notice, he actually included the repeal of that de minimis loophole. So we were very excited about it. It wasn't written very thoroughly, and then they took it out.
Mm.
So we're not any better off yet. But I just feel like when you have a tariff discussion, the goal is, we'll get your thing there. So
Yeah.
we're going to keep trying to go back at it and see if we can build support for it. Unfortunately, this tariff discussion has just become chaos, because they're on one
Yeah.
day, they're off the next. And so it hasn't been that helpful. But again, it's one piece of the puzzle. Public awareness is a big piece of the puzzle. And I think, you guys are part of that conversation. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Most people are just outraged when they hear the numbers, and
Mhm.
they think, why did I buy that $6 thing that of course I threw away, or I thought I donated,
Yeah.
or it fell apart while I was trying it on? This
Right.
is one more salt.
So, can you speak to us a little bit about how caucuses actually work and what they do? Because people, I'm sure, are so interested in this, and they go, "Wow, a slow fashion caucus! What can I look for? What can I do? How can I contribute to this effort?"
So Congress, we make laws, we fund the government. All those things are, fairly complicated steps in their own right. Like I said, we are working on a very comprehensive piece of legislation around slow fashion, but that takes a lot of time. And right now, it's a little harder to get legislation through. But forming a caucus is a way that Congress says, hey, there's a lot of people who have a shared interest in something. And how do we put our names on a piece of paper, say we're the people who are interested in this, and we want to do more to learn about this. We want to do more to be active in this sphere. Let us know when there's a bill coming up. So as soon as we formed that, we sent a letter around to our colleagues, and whoever signed up, we've started keeping them informed, and having briefings. So we might have an expert on a particular topic, on the waste stream, or on recycling, or on thrifting and how that works. So you might get a briefing on that, and you invite all the people who are interested and hope that you can continue to expand the interest. And so it's really, in a way, an informal interest group that you already know is sort of your base. When you do a piece of legislation or you want to send a letter, we often, as members of Congress, send letters to department heads to say, as you're considering this year's funding stream, please do X, or anything like that. And so, a couple ways that people can be helpful, and we can make sure you have all the right information, is, if you're thinking, well, my congressperson should care about this, you can always send a letter to your congressperson and say, like, you live in Kentucky. So you say, well, I'm going to find out who represents me in Congress, and I'm going to send them a letter and say, please join the Slow Fashion Caucus. And, we can give you some more information about which office to contact, to sign on. And as soon as we get a piece of legislation, it's another good way to say, hey, please sign on to this legislation, because, I live here in Ohio, but I'm worried about my waste stream, or I'm a sheep farmer, and I think we should use more domestic wool in our processing, in our products today. So that's basically what it is.
So, do y'all get together and have physical meetings from time to time?
That certainly happens with caucuses. Everybody's
Hmm.
so busy now, I can't
Yeah.
even try to imagine
Right.
pulling together a meeting. But we do informational briefings.
Yeah.
So let's say, for instance, like when we finish this bill, we'll probably get 2 or 3 experts to come together, let's say on a Wednesday at noon, and provide lunch and ask our colleagues, come in and learn more about this and what this bill will do. And if you don't have time, send the staff person from your office who's most involved in this. And frankly, that's what staff people do. So often we'll have a briefing, with 30 or 40 staff people and say, let's give you all the facts about why the problem is there, what you can do about it, what's in this bill that we're trying to change. And so that's usually what happens. That's the kind of meeting that we have. We sometimes talk informally. We're all a lot of us are on a text chain. So sometimes people will get a good idea and just send it to everybody in the text chain and say, let's do something about this. The other day, my colleagues sent around a text. I forgot what precipitated it, but they were saying, hey, wouldn't it be a good slow fashion thing if we had a clothing exchange one night? Like we'll have an informal clothing exchange with the women members of Congress, and we'll all get together in a meeting room and we'll just, like you do in these things, dump our clothes on the table and say, hey, anybody want my blazer that's, purple and I don't like the color anymore or whatever, but sort of an informal get together with all of us, probably, drink a few glasses of wine and relax for a minute and just say like, yeah, let's exchange some clothing. So
That's so
that's a very
fun.
That's
kind of
so
goofy
great.
thing to do, but all my colleagues were like, yeah, get it done. Who can organize it? That's a great idea because we all have to wear the uniform when we go to work every week. And many of my colleagues know by heart the best thrift shops in Washington.
Yeah, I love that idea. Do you think that's something that would be a bipartisan event? Would you have Republican colleagues participating in the clothing swap with you?
We would certainly invite them. Our invitation to join the caucus is bipartisan. Right now, we only have Democrats signed up, but
Okay.
I've been talking to a few of my colleagues. I think one of these days we'll get a couple of the Republican women to sign on, or Republican men. It's a good cause,
Yeah.
and it's not a partisan sort
No.
of
Right.
um,
Right.
stretch. So I think we'll get there. And also, I think a couple pieces of legislation that we're working on. I do have a bipartisan piece of legislation. It's related to PFAS in clothing.
Yes.
Mhm.
I have a Republican co-sponsor of that, and
Wow.
I think we'll get some more because that impacts some manufacturers of clothing. It's actually just a simple explanation is that it's if you currently produce a rain garment
Mhm.
that doesn't use PFAS as its water shedding property, but it's made in a foreign country, so it's coming in. It's actually has a higher tariff than garments with PFAS. So
Okay.
it's impacting some of our manufacturers. It's not a domestically manufactured product, but you've gone to all the trouble to make sure it's toxic free.
Mhm.
You actually have to pay a higher tariff. So it's patently unfair. It skews to favor the oil and gas industry, or, somebody who uses toxic chemicals. So that was an easy one to sign on to.
Oh, that's interesting. I was recently in REI and I asked them, I was looking for a raincoat, and they said they're working on producing these PFAS free rain gear. He said Patagonia is really ahead of the game on that. I looked that up. The Patagonia PFAS free items are quite costly, which I guess because of what you just said.
We were working with LL Bean in Maine, and I think there's another manufacturer, Utah, that now makes the garments. I'm sure Patagonia does, but you're right; they have to cost more, and it's not because. At first, I thought, well, maybe it's a more expensive process. No, it's just a higher
Wow.
tariff.
Wow.
So that's bonkers. So yet another way we're trying to make sure in this tariff argument we get some good out of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
On this podcast, we generally don't go anywhere near politics or hot button topics, but you're here and you're a Democrat. I want to know what you have to say. Your work in farming, food policy, and supporting American made goods reflects values like local production and self sufficiency that often now would get associated with the right, movements like MAGA or
Mhm.
MAHA. But obviously, these values have deep roots in progressive politics, sustainability, and community resilience. This is such a polarized time. Why do you think these values get framed so differently depending on political affiliation? Do you see any way to move past these divisions and have more meaningful conversations that we actually do agree on a lot and we can actually get things done in a positive way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important time to be working on ways to do that. I mean, I told you in the beginning. I mean, I've been working on this sort of notion of organic food and food is medicine, and your health depends on what you eat, and all these things since the 70s.
Mhm,
And then we were considered sort of marginalized on the left.
mhm.
And it is a strange turn of events that, in some ways now, these are seen as sort of right-wing issues. I mean, my goal every day is to try to figure out, how do we just keep these as issues that are about our health, about our well-being, and how do we continue to work together. I'm in the Food as Medicine Caucus. That's also another group, which is
Cool.
very bipartisan. We have
Wow.
Republicans on that caucus. I'm on the Agriculture Committee. I work with Republicans all the time on issues related to these things, and I try to keep it as much as I can. You know, it's me and another person, and here's the issue. And the same with my state. We have people who don't believe in giving their kids vaccines, but really want to make sure that raw milk is available to them in a way that they can depend on and have it be healthy. We have people who are fundamental believers in that what you eat is related to how healthy you are. So I just try to keep it as much as I can on the issues, and
Mhm.
not say, just because a Republican told me that, I'm not going to work on it.
Mm.
And I think particularly around agriculture, I mean, I hope that we can keep from turning all these issues into something so stigmatized because of the politics of it that we can't get anything done, or we can't go forward on it. It's fairly new into the next administration, so we're all just kind of waiting to see a little bit about how it will play out on issues of health, and wellness. But I'm not going to back down from being active in it. I have worked for many years with one of my colleagues from Kentucky, Representative Massey, on we sponsor a bill together on slaughterhouse capacity, how you can buy. I've been a farmer, you have to have the facilities to process
Yeah.
animals, processed meat. So how do you do more of that? We sponsored a raw milk bill together that's very specific to states that have approved standards on raw milk, and how you could work with another state that has the same approved standards. So, I mean, I feel like I have a long time of working with people across the aisle on those things and have a good relationship with those people. But I hope it doesn't turn into a kind of weird stigmatized thing that we somehow aren't able to talk to each other about it. It's a really good point. And I don't think anybody should, you know, before they read to the end of the story, say, well, I'm not on the right side, so I'm not going to do that. Like,
Yeah.
we just all
Yeah.
have to be
Oh,
together.
absolutely. I think we have to be very conscious and vigilant that these things that mean a lot to us, that we're deeply passionate about, don't become hijacked
Mhm.
by certain, political entities or campaigns or whatever, so that they get tossed aside.
Yeah. What I just heard you say is that we're on the outside, we just read the newspaper. It sounds like on the inside, people are actually talking to each other, and our people that represent us actually are working on issues. When it comes down to things like voting on stuff, my understanding is so many things are packed into things, and it just ends up being so polarizing and things don't get voted through. Would you say that's how it goes? Like, generally, people are trying to work on the issues and do the right thing for their constituents, and then when it gets down to like the floor, that's when things get crazy because we're
Mhm.
trying to pack too much in.
I think that there's still a lot of people trying to work with each other and do the right thing, hear what their constituents are concerned about. And I think, we're at the very beginning of a new administration, and we kind of have to see along the way where things go. And truthfully, Congress hasn't done that much yet. And,
Hmm.
we're very focused on a variety of things that have nothing to do with raw milk or organic food or regenerative agriculture. We will see where we get to, but I think we have a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that want to work together, and I don't think either side should try to sort of hijack it and
Yeah.
think that you
Mhm.
exclude people's ability to be participatory or engaged in it.
It's so affirming and validating to hear a real
Yeah.
congressperson just be a normal person.
Yeah, I love hearing you say you're on the Food as Medicine Caucus. I
That's
find that
cool.
really fascinating. And I wondered if you'd just talk a little bit about what you do on your farm right now and how you implement regenerative farming, so to speak. I know that's a big topic, but
So currently, I do a few things. I have my own garden and, my own plants. I have a house where I grow a variety of things, Anyway, but predominantly I helped to start a farm that I worked on for many years that is year-round vegetables. So we have 3 greenhouses that are actually running year-round that have wood-fired boiler that helps them to stay a little bit warm. So we grow in the wintertime, we grow things like spinach, kale, things that can stand some cold weather because it's Maine, and a variety of things that we can sell once a week in a little farm stand. And then all summer long, we have a vegetable stand that grows everything you can imagine, but also some of them in greenhouses because it's still very cool in the summer. So we do that. We have a vegetable stand 2 days a week. We have a dinner in our barn for 100 people at a time. So things that are made on the farm that are, vegetables that we grow or some animals that we raise. Yeah, so that's what we do. I personally don't run it anymore. I started it, I designed it, and about 3 years ago, we turned the entire property over to the American Farmland Trust.
Uh-huh.
And someone who worked with me for years now runs it himself. So I actually live on one portion of the farm and have the great privilege of going there and hanging out with other people and buying vegetables there. I don't do it all myself, but I designed it and put it all together, and then was lucky enough to be able to make sure that it will now be a forever. And it's a big part of our community, and it's a big part of people who live there and use it.
Wow. Can folks visit it?
Oh, absolutely. We also own a small inn with 9 people and a little restaurant there. And one of my daughters has her own restaurant that is sort of more like pizza and a brewery.
Oh,
So
that's amazing. What is this called? What's the farm called?
the Turner Farm.
The Turner.
So yeah,
Okay.
if you Google it, you can find the Turner Farm, and the inn is called Nebo Lodge, Nebo.
If we have time for one more question, we like to ask all of our guests, what does the good dirt mean to you?
The good dirt. Well, when I was in college, it was the first time really that somebody started talking to me about dirt and soil.
Mhm.
And I just remember that I had a professor once who said, dirt is what you get under your fingernails, and soil is what you need to have a great crop every year.
Mm.
And so whether you're talking about the dirt or the soil, one of the things I learned early on is it's just critically important to think about the soil. We've learned so much over the years around the importance of what's in our soil, the microorganisms there, the things that we didn't know a long time ago, and now we know are just critical to being a good farmer or growing healthy food. I even worked a couple of years ago on trying to get federal funding to make sure we look at whether or not food is healthier for you if the soil is healthier, and we're still waiting for more information on that. So I often talk about myself as being a total soil nerd,
Mhm.
and loving to talk about this. So I'm just thrilled that anybody could focus on things like soil and the healthiness of having good soil and good farming. So I love what you guys do.
Thanks for
Yeah.
coming on. We know how busy you are. This was a great conversation, and we will circle back to you about what's next.
If people want to know more about the caucus or follow your work, is there a newsletter or something they can get on, or how can they follow you?
You can find it a lot on our congressional
Mhm.
website. We try to list all kinds of information about the work we're doing, and as new things come up, they can contact us. You can send us an email any day, and honestly, if people want to, they can just email me anytime at Shelly@Pingree.com, and I'll make sure somebody gets some of the information that they want.
Awesome.
And Shelly, we're local to Washington, D.C., so anytime there's an event where the public can come and show up and help support, let us know. We really enjoyed coming out to the launch last summer. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great. Well, we will definitely stay in touch.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate having you, and it was fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.